I'm the representative for BAMN, the legal, one of the lawyers for BAMN, and I'm also the national chair of BAMN.
How did it go?
I think that we did get our point across, and our point is that the University of California has got to be able to use measures that are now barred by Prop 209 to be able to create a level playing field in the admission system so that the current reality that this state's high school graduates would be a minority, Black and Latino, and that the numbers in terms of access to the University of California, in particular, the flagship campuses, is drastically and dramatically lower.
What do you say when Ralph says, by not having affirmative action, you're actually giving everyone, an applicant, an equal opportunity to get into the system?
I think it's just absolutely untrue. And when UCLA adopted a holistic review policy for admissions, and they started looking at test scores and grades in the context of the students' real lives, taking into account the ways in which those two measures are distorted by discrimination and by institutional racism, and they admitted twice as many Black students in their entering classes, immediately Ward Connerly and other people said, we're going to court and we're going to sue, because we think that there must be a preference that's being given. And to imagine that the University of California, which gets tens of thousands of applicants, wouldn't have some system to quickly sift through those, which is what looking at grade point averages and test scores provides them with, is just crazy. Yeah, they're going to use those two criteria because it makes it possible to narrow down who should be considered. Our problem is that Black and Latino and Native American students are the only people that aren't considered in terms of who they are as individuals and in terms of how their life experiences and race and racism affect those two criteria for admissions.
How do you know that, though? That Latinos and Native Americans are not considered?
We know that by the numbers. We know that for example, at UCLA, that Latino and Black students that were admitted under holistic review had 3.97 grade point averages. For many of those students, that's about the highest grade point average you could get because they didn't have access to AP classes. They couldn't get a 4.5 grade point average. They couldn't, go above the 4.0 bar. And so obviously, if you look at their schools, you take into account the opportunities that they had, there's no way that you could find those students less meritorious or, less deserving of going to UCLA than people who, right from the beginning, had more advantages.
Now, Mr. Casara did say that there is no barrier to UC enacting policies that do take into account those adverse conditions students grow in.
Yeah, except that he would sue immediately if those numbers rose. I think his position is completely disingenuous. And if the admissions...
You think he's just saying that?
Yeah, I think he is just saying that. And because under Prop 209, the basic premise of Prop 209 is that Black and Latino students are inferior and that any huge change in the numbers in the UC system would amount to a preference being used by the universities. And that's why we want a trial. We want to make clear that that term preference has no applicability to higher education.
What is significantly different now versus 15 years ago on this Prop 209 challenge?
I think what's different now is that we have the numbers. I think what's different now is that the alternatives have been tried and they have failed. I think what's different now is that it's clear that over the next 10 years, California is going to be a state in which there is an increasingly large majority of Latino and Black, and yet the opportunity to go to the best public universities in this state becomes more and more exclusively that for white people. You can't have a situation like that. That when we say that this is going to create a new apartheid system in California, we mean that. You can't have a system in which white people have opportunities that are afforded to them that are denied to the vast majority of people in this state due to no fault of their own.
What does the data show?
Right now, compared, even to 14 years ago, over 50% of high school students in California are Latino and Black. And yet the numbers in the UCs, in particular at UCLA and at UC Berkeley, are about 15%. And that's a huge difference between the numbers that are graduating and the numbers that are being accepted at those universities.
What kind of impact did the Michigan case have on this and the Supreme Court, the 2003 Supreme Court?
I think that the Michigan case has already had an impact because the three-judge panel of the Sixth Circuit rejected all of the arguments of Wilson and said that an identical ballot measure and constitutional reform denied minorities, Latino and Black and Native American, equal access to the political process. We're the only people in this state that can't go to the UC Regents and say, change the admission system so that more Black and Latino students get in. Alumni can go and they can get an adjustment. People can, lesbian and gay advocates can go and they can say increase the number of LGBT students. You could have people from Southern California demand more places for people from Southern California. The only people that can't do that and receive relief now are Latino, Black, and Native American. And if that isn't creating an unequal and unfair system based on race, I don't know what is.
At the end, you mentioned some of the students, especially in the graduate level.
I think that's where you see the difference most profoundly. And in particular, in law schools where, for instance, this year there's a class of 200 students incoming at UC Davis, 3 of whom are Latino, 2 of whom are Black. They've been years equivalent to that at UC Berkeley and UCLA. And when you think about the gains that we've made in terms of public officials, judges, representatives, assemblymen, all of that, based on the opening up of those law schools 30 years ago, you know that we're going to fall farther and farther and farther behind if with the numbers being as tiny as they are now because of the ban on affirmative action.
And I asked you this before, but we didn't get on camera. What's the next step? What do you guys definitely do?
I think it's very, very likely. Certainly if we win here, we won't be appealing, but we think our opponents will. And so I think one way or another, this case probably goes to an en banc panel and potentially to the Supreme Court. From the standpoint of the students that brought this case, we can't stop fighting. We can't accept a system in which we are barred from going to our state universities and from continuing the progress that we're so proud to have made over the course of the last decades.
Would you just, for my reporting of some of those numbers that you mentioned for the law schools?
Yeah, I think that at law schools and business schools and medical schools put together, I mean, 1 Black student at UCLA's business school now to have 2 Black students and 3 Latino students at UC Davis, which is not even the most prestigious of the UC law schools, in a class of 200. Those figures are being replicated in law schools, state law schools, medical schools, business schools across the state. And what they mean is a devastating drop in the number of Latino lawyers, in the number of Black and Latino doctors, in the number of people who are trained to, conduct, assess things on a theoretical level in terms of business and economic growth. That's a huge change for the state of California, and it is a change that cannot be accepted by the people of California when California is becoming more and more and more a majority minority state.